Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. We are very, very glad to have a special guest speaker today, Dr. Sayan Dey. Um, we are we are very glad to have him as a guest speaker for the course in postcolonial literature in English at the University of Bergamo. This is a BA course with several students, and having the chance to have Dr. Dey is great because we are exploring some basic concepts in the postcolonial discourse and theory. We have been reflecting a lot on subaltern and on other notions, hybridity, and so on. But because we know that Dr. Sayan Dey is very focused on several of these topics and has been working a lot on decolonization, well, we are very glad to welcome you, Sayan.
Thank you so much, Stefano. Thank you so much, all of you, for making me a part of this very interesting session, I'm sure, and I'm looking forward to it, learning with all of you.
That's amazing. Well, Sayan, I would go straight into the topic of decolonizing. What is this concept in the field of postcolonial studies, and what is this relevance? How can we define it, and why is it relevant for students to start maybe approaching this field to know this notion?
I think that's a fantastic question to start with, and I deeply appreciate that we all start with this question because this question is often unaddressed. Honestly speaking, with my very whatever little bit of experiences I have with respect to my research on decolonization thus far, we do talk about a lot of theories. We would be quoting and paraphrasing theorists from across the world. But when it comes to these very fundamental questions, that how do we differentiate between post-colonization and decolonization, or why we at all require to engage with a new word, or structuralize a new word like decolonization? What was really going wrong with post-colonization? Often these questions are ignored. To start off with, obviously it's a very broad question. I mean, it can just be an endless conversation, but let me start with one basic perspective. And I think one basic perspective is to start off with the historical periodization of these two concepts. I mean, when we use the word post-colonial, itself is a very new perspective, because the concept, the theoretical paradigm, if we say as a methodology through whatever lens we try to look at post-colonization, it emerged obviously after the the judicial independence that the countries gained from the European colonizers, is what is being understood as the onset of the post-colonial era. Obviously, across the world, the dates are different, the time frames are different, the contexts are different. But in general, if we have to start from a very rooted perspective, I think this is one way to start off. Whereas when we talk about decolonization, or at least when decolonization was launched as a political movement, as a historical movement across the globe, centrally emerging from different pockets of Latin America, from the different pockets of Africa, and then gradually spreading across the globe. Decolonization is understood as the resistance, as the forms of resistance. Initially, obviously, it started off with physical resistances. I mean, if we just go back to the time of the history, right, when Americas was invaded, at that point of time, when the indigenous, the native indigenous communities there, they started resisting against the invasion of the European colonial powers in the name, who came into the Americas in the name of trade and commerce. And then eventually they started taking over their lands, their cultures, their education systems, their religious beliefs, the natural environment. I mean, it was not just the impact on the humans, but it was also the impact on the natural environment and other forms of more than human living civilizations as well. So the resistances that we saw at that point of time is something that is understood as decolonization. And now, if we move from this historical periodization towards more towards other perspectives, let's say, what does it mean in terms of ideology? Or what does it mean in terms of a theory? What does it mean in terms of a method, right? I mean, and these are very essential questions. When we ask these questions, decolonization as a movement again can be seen in the contemporary times is a way of rethinking our history. Usually, when we look into, I mean, the so-called established decolonial scholars from Latin America, if we talk about, Walter Mignolo, if we are talking about, from Portugal, we have Boaventura de Sousa Santos, and obviously, I mean, it's important to note about the kind of controversies looming around him. But when I'm just referring to the theory, I'm just taking his name. When we look into the works of Ramon Gross-Fogel, and then obviously, back, if we go further back in the works of Humberto Maturana, and so many several other scholars from Latin America. And then when we turn towards Africa, we see the works of obviously Frantz Fanon. I mean, one place to start off with. Fanon's works are considered to be very decolonial in nature, according to decolonial thinkers and philosophers. We can talk about Achille Mbembe. We can talk about Sabelo Ndlovu Gatsheni. And then we can talk about the political thinkers like Thomas Sankara and several other activists and politicians and freedom fighters, academicians, researchers who came together and who felt that it's important for us, like if we are talking about the impact of colonization in the contemporary times, which are referred to with terms like neocolonialism, coloniality, it's important to once again revisit the historical roots, because a lot of histories and perspectives that we are living with are very much a continuation of those colonial narratives. Maybe we may be aware of it, we may not be aware of it, but there is a continuation, and that awareness needs to be globally generated. And probably these two perspectives could be our two possible initiation points to understand how post-colonization and decolonization, or rather, tying back to the question, what does decolonization means within the perspective of post-colonization? But I would like to also draw your attention towards certain very, very essential perspectives. And in case if you are looking at the works, especially of a lot of young decolonial scholars, who on the one side doesn't really dismiss the usage of the term decolonization, but the skepticism is growing more and more. And it's not and I don't feel it's a problem to confess that I am one of them, right? Because now I am becoming more and more skeptical about the usage of the term for several reasons. Number one is I believe you are aware with this work called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Tuck and Young. It was, I believe, written in 2008, or sometimes I just get confused with the dates. Please forgive me for that. But if you look at this work called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor by Tuck and Young, where it is very clearly outlined that there is a very rash and random usage of the term. And that is very problematic. There is a rash and random usage of the term, because what is happening is, and it has happened with various other theories as well, where ultimately it becomes a sort of a status symbol of using certain theories easily. On a lot of times, decolonization is just being used as a sort of a keyword to climb certain ladders of privilege in the academic and the research system. Or maybe to, for instance, if I take an example in the context of India, and also with whose relationship I shared an article with all of you, where this is for the first time, in fact, since 2014, when the right-wing BJP government came into the power, that they started using the term decolonization in the mainstream discourses. I mean, obviously, prior to that, the term was used, but was very restricted within the academic space. Like, you're writing research papers, you are teaching in the classroom, that's it. But in the mainstream popular discourses, the term was not there. But the issue is they are using the term not really for the sake of decolonization. They are using it to propagate their right-wing, a very Hindu-centric propaganda, and which is very Islamophobic in nature, which is in fact anything that is not Hindu, they are against it. Whether you're talking about food habits, about fashion, about culture, about education, you take any other instances. And such a thing, such an approach, such an attitude obviously cannot be determined as decolonial. So here I'm giving this a very contextual example, and because I'm from India, so I'm just speaking in the context of India. It is a one major problem that we are seeing is where the term is being used, but is just being used as a blanket to propagate some other forms of self-profiting perspectives and ideologies. Another major problem, and I think it's essential for us to be very clear with it. Another problem that I find with the whole narrative of decolonization is what I would like to argue as hyper provincialization. And what I mean by hyper provincialization, where you see that where certain racial communities and structures and cultures are negated very deliberately out of the discussion. Because I have worked, based on various research projects across the world with countries, with researchers, both from global north and global south, have lived and researched in places like South Africa or Bhutan and other parts in short and long phases across different parts of the Europe. There is this very problematic tendency that I find is where there is this usual narrative that, okay, once the whites colonized us, so when we discuss decolonization, whites shouldn't feature there, or white people should not be a part of it, because once when they colonized, they never featured the black. Now, why I found this as problematic? Why I find this as problematic? Because it's like, it is leading us to nowhere. I mean, if we have to discuss a problem, we all have to sit together and discuss the problem. We cannot negate certain ideologies, certain bodies, certain racial communities, certain perspectives, certain arguments, and try and claim ourselves to be decolonial. And when I mean by ourselves, like anybody who is discussing about decoloniality and practicing them. Now, this whole culture, now decolonization, in the name of radicalism, in the name of anger, in the name of being very straightforward or outspoken, they often resort to this problematic perspective of cancel culture, this problematic practice of cancel culture, like you are not welcome, or we are not just welcome to, at least listen to multiple perspectives. I mean, listening is not accepting. We don't have to sit here and accept. We can just keep on arguing, but negating certain racial bodies and, certain racial ideologies or perspectives, selectively negating them, keeping them out of the space, is in a way, I will go to the extent of kind of recycling the very colonial modes of thinking, just packaging them in a different way. So what is exactly, in what ways we are progressing? It's like, once you did not give me this benefit, so I will not give you this benefit. So then what? I mean, we are trying to find solutions, right? We are trying to find disentangle ourselves from the already existing, still existing, in fact, the colonial hangovers in terms of our perspectives, ideologies, visions, education, cultures, whatever it is, fashion that we are still living with. Then the question is how it is then, anyways benefiting us if we are just practicing the same sort of recycling game rather than trying to think in more inclusive, in more diverse, and in more cohabitual and respectful terms. And I think this is something, Amitav Ghosh, from his eco literary perspectives, from his environmental arguments, also to a vast extent talk about that. I'm sure we will be talking more about that as we go ahead. So as I said, there are so many endless things to talk about, but I wanted to flag off some of these aspects because, and that is why I would also invite you to read Olafemi Taigo's Against Decolonization if you have not already engaged. Though again, as a reader, with respect to my perspectives and experiences, I don't agree with everything. I don't have to agree with everything, but I would recommend that as a very important work because it provokes us to think with simple questions like this, that we start talking about so much of decolonization. We have this decolonizing the museum, decolonizing the space, decolonizing the, the cafeteria, decolonizing the sidewalks. But how? How do we do that? What are the procedures of doing that? Tell me a few practical ways of doing that. Is it at all possible to decolonize everything? Because today we live in a world of entanglements. Today we live in a world of entanglements. My food, my fashion, my language, my culture, my vision, everything is so entangled. How do I distinguish at all? In a lot of cases, it's not possible to distinguish. If you ask me, is your food habit colonial or decolonial? Honestly, I have to keep shut. I don't know. How do I make a distinction is my first question. So it's fine. We need to decolonize. It's important, but let us start with practical questions rather than sitting on a superficial ream and just proposing fancy theories and fluffy philosophies. And then when it comes to praxis, we don't exist. We don't know what to do and how to do and where to do. So I think I'll stop here.
Wow, Sayan, thank you very much for this first insights. I think we started from the genealogy of this notion of decolonizing and the importance of the many different voices involved in this mechanism. But you also pointed to something very interesting, which is the misuses of this term and these principles, just maybe as a label in different books and publications maybe, but also this function of propaganda of decolonizing in the public discourse and the risk or the actual awareness that these misuses are in fact recycling, as you're saying very well, this colonial mode of thinking, which is repeated again and again, no? And you're right when you say that there is a complexity in the present day world that needs to be studied, and we need to develop critical perspective. And what I'm asking you is two things. The first, because maybe the system in our room is not like the best. Some students maybe ask me if you kindly speak a little slower, because maybe I think I hear you very well, but maybe the system, there's a little echo. So maybe, but yeah, with the same energy, please, because it's amazing. And just talking about the tools that we as critics, young critics, have to develop in order to be capable of acknowledging and recognizing these misuses of decolonizing. So the question for you is, what do you think that it is important for students approaching post-colonial studies, like the students of this class, should keep in mind in order to not to fall in the trap of these labels, no? So thank you very much, Sayan.
No, thank you so much, Stefano, and thank you so much, all. I think this is another very, very nice question to proceed. And also just to let you know, at any point of time, if you think you're having a difficulty in following me, just feel free to interrupt. Okay, please don't hesitate. All right. Yeah. I think one of the many ways of countering this labeling is not to jump into the popular discourses. Now, what do I mean by this statement? Again, from my very personal experiences, I have seen, and I find this very problematic, is whenever people want to define the term decolonization, I'm just taking very practical examples. I have majority of the cases, not all, but majority of the cases I have seen that when they're defining the term decolonization in their research papers, in their assignments or whatever, by default, they would resort to Latin American scholars. Now, again, obviously, I don't have any personal grudge against the Latin American scholars. I must confess that my first understanding of the narrative of decolonization started off with them. So there is no harm in reading them. But the problem is, now an Indian problem cannot have a Latin American solution. A Ugandan problem cannot have a Latin American solution. An Italian problem cannot have a Latin American solution. We need to understand the context. So one important essential point for all of us, at least from my experiences, it's important to remember, is that when we argue decolonization, let us first embrace our own context. Embracing them in terms of experiences, embracing them in terms of scholarships, embracing them, if possible, in terms of languages, embracing them in terms of cultures. We need to read. We need to talk about Latin American decolonization. We need to talk about African decolonization. We need to talk about Asian decolonization, or to be more specific, maybe Southeast Asian decolonization or South Asian decolonization or West Asian decolonization. We need to talk about all of these things. Otherwise, how we are going to build up a kind of planetary solidarity that we often talk about. We have our different goals, we have our different visions, but we need to, join hands with each other, even in our differences, even in our conflicts. It's a collective effort, it's a collective resistance, but that is only possible. That is actually not possible without embracing our respective contexts. So whenever we are starting, obviously, my very strong suggestion to you would be always acknowledge the positionalities from where you are coming from. Always be very, very clear about, and very clear, very outspoken, very proud, and very bold about your positionalities from where you are speaking. Now, the question is, we may also think around that, why are people doing that? I mean, why are people just by default referring to a random definition from Latin America, which probably is very contextual in the Latin American decolonial movements? Or why people are just resorting to a random definition situated within the African continent, which maybe is very contextual in those particular spaces? Because is the easy availability of the popular narratives of decolonization. And that is why people are again more and more arguing about how decolonization is becoming a metaphor. This is another way where decolonization is being metaphorized, is being the whole intent with which the movement was historically launched is being completely erased and is being hijacked for something else. Initially, I remember that back in 2017, 2018, when I was still on the final verge of finishing my PhD, I was very excited to attend a few decolonial summer schools. Okay, I attended in different parts of South Africa centrally, but you also see these summer schools happening in Granada in Spain. It happens in Barcelona. Barcelona every year they do a big summer school out there. But they started off in some parts of Mexico, but probably didn't function well. They started off in US that also didn't work out well, but still some are quite functional. But what I can say from my personal experiences that when I went to the summer schools, what happened is we see that there is a very underlying game, a kind of a Cold War game that is underlying, very soft, very strategically being fleshed out to showcase whose decoloniality is more authentic and more powerful than the other. So I'm giving you these practical examples because we need to sensitize each other with the practical situation, right? Otherwise, how we will drive the elephant out of the room. Now, because what happened is, like, for instance, there would be one summer school at the University of South Africa. Simultaneously, there is one decolonial summer school at the University of Cape Town. Simultaneously, there will be one decolonial summer school at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And maybe you are attending one of those schools, but when you happen to meet the participants of the other schools, you come to you realize there is a major problem that is not being focused on, and that is more than focusing on the intent of the summer schools of sensitizing, radicalizing the thinking and the intellectual processes of mass thinking. It is more of becoming like a personal power grabbing system, a personal power grabbing space where one institution is trying to put out this message that we are more authentic, more advanced, more invitational than the other summer school, and they would actually, very strategically, in very indirect ways, they will try to put down the quality of other summer schools while promoting their own summer schools. Now, that is not decolonization. That is just simple power grabbing. Now, if we are engaging with decolonization in this way, then what is the value of having the existence of this terminology, the existence of these conversations? So one and the first and the foremost point to begin with is always speak from your respective context. Never ever compromise with the praxis. Start off with praxis. If we are thinking about, if I want to decolonize my food, just let's not say I want to decolonize my food and write 5 pages about it. The first and the foremost question should be, how do I do that? How do I know that my food is colonial? What are the colonial elements in the food? What are the decolonial elements in the food? And if you're not finding that, let's not engage with that. We don't have to be ashamed of it. We don't have to put forth fake promises that decolonizing the food. And that is why, very sadly, a lot of these decolonial movements in the past and in the present, apart from, just superficial big talks, have practically failed. Even after these, and I think some of the burning instances could be the fees must fall movement, or the roads must fall movement. What happened in the fees must fall movement? Anytime you go to South Africa, you look at these very elite universities like the University of Witwatersrand, the University of Cape Town, which were historically, or the University of Rhodes, which were historically, founded on the vision of the European education system for the white natives in South Africa. The fees are still so high, a huge section of the society are still unable to afford them. What happens with the fees must fall? Multiple people went to the prison. So many people just vanished out of the scene. They are still not traceable. So many people just died. Their dead bodies were never found. There were burning of effigies, shops being broken. Even when I was in South Africa in one of those days, all of a sudden the student protest broke out and they were smashing the glasses on the shops out there in the street around the University of Witwatersrand. It happens every year. Nothing changes. Obviously, change is not something which happens overnight. But then we also have to ask this question, despite so much of resistance, we know that there are problems around, still why the changes are not taking place. And One of the many reasons behind it is later on, when investigations take place, we find that many of these people who participated in this movement, they just wanted to climb the ladder in their respective political parties. Later on, they just wanted to have a very prestigious position in one of the political parties they always dreamt of to be. So many people who indulge in these movements have their own personal self-profiting agendas to fulfill rather than really focusing on the movement. So to cut a long story short, let us start talking with respect to our context. Let us start talking and thinking around with experiences even before we say 10 points or 10 models of decoloniality or 2 models. I mean, let's not fall into this trap of indoctrination. It's harmful, it's dangerous. I'll stop there.
Well, Dr. Day is offering us a very relevant perspective here. First of all, you see how much in context his perspective is. So it's much beyond the mere academic and theoretical framework. It's very much into practice. You could hear how much he underlines the fact that certain notions, even decolonizing itself, is being labeled and used and abused in different contexts, but hiding these othering processes. No, we have been studying a lot this notion of othering, deconstruction, dualisms. And we really need to be critical and to become critics as we want to become. We probably need to read the untold stories behind and beyond labels. I think it's relevant. And I think also it's important to underline the importance of knowing the context as well, and to be aware of the perspectives you're speaking from. What is the point, the perspective, the point of view that I have, that I'm speaking from? Because this maybe allow us to understand also the what's behind certain positioning. I think I really enjoyed very much what he said regarding these summer schools or courses on postcoloniality and decolonizing, and having this latent narratives of, oh, my course is more decolonial than others. And this creates now a system of othering. And or this, the relevance of decolonizing your own food, and be brave and be open to discuss very practical issues in the world around us. I think this is a very important lessons that we could hear directly from a great scholars on this topic. Yeah. And Sayan, we have been reading, we've started reading, in fact, one essay, if we can define it, essay from Amitav Ghosh that you mentioned, the Nutmeg Curse, which I think is interesting for its capacity to maybe to put together this complexity that we are discussing, and moving from theory to praxis to theoretical framework to actual, very material issues. And how do you think, if you think that this text is useful for this discussion, so how do you think this text could be relevant for enriching our critical perspective on the direction to decolonizing?
Yes, I think one of the many ways, and I find Nutmeg's Curse amongst many other writings of Amitav Ghosh quite fascinating, because he just doesn't bluntly take a stand. He doesn't try to tell us what is the right decolonial or the post-colonial. In fact, he is not even very interested in the usage of these words. Like, I remember I have listened to some of his live interviews in lit fests across, and the moment he heard these terms post-colonial and decolonial, he really didn't like it, because and I understand that in his writing, that he doesn't tell us to take a stand. He doesn't create binary oppositions for us. He doesn't tell us what is the right decolonial or what is the right post-colonial and what is the wrong post-colonial, right? In fact, he does the opposite. He just makes it look as practical. It is extremely complex. I mean, if we look at his works, Nutmeg's Curse, if we look at this work, The Living Mountain, very recently, then if we talk about the Great Derangement, another fascinating work. If you look all of these, because they're so deeply connected to each other, so I'm just making reference to them as well. He talks about the complexity. He invites us to think that before labeling, before falling into these traps of labeling, we have to understand the complexity that as on the one side, the colonizers came, invaded without an invitation. On the other side, behind their ability to flourish were also a lot of natives. It was the natives. I mean, in India, for instance, again, because I can give a reference to Indian history very clearly, where you have ample of histories to share with you how high caste Hindu people were actually very close to the European colonizers, because they actually looked down upon the low caste and other so-called low category communities as slaves. And when the British came and saw this fragment already existing in the country, they were absolutely excited because they felt that, wow, we already have the fracture in place. We don't have to work a lot. So they actually got the support of the lot of these local high caste natives who helped them in systematizing, the master slave culture within the country. So now when I unpack this narrative, which is very much there in Nutmeg's Curse in terms of the spice trade, in terms of the colonization of Southeast Asia, how the natural environment, native beliefs and practices, their ways of looking at the forest were completely abundant, were completely taken out of them, and they were just reduced and erased. They were reduced to in states of being just discards or waste, and they were being completely eroded out of those places. So how did this happen? It just didn't happen on a one-sided way. There were also natives who incentivized the process to sort of, fulfill their own self-profiting motives. And it is not very different. The contexts may be different. We do see that, from the very beginning, Amitav Ghosh not only talks about the colonization of the humans, but also talks about the colonization of the natural environment, even before, all of these fields like post-humanism, post-anthropocentrism, waste studies became like disciplines. He have been voicing it out very loud, right? On the other side, he also points out those problems which are very, very contemporary, like the examples I was sharing, that many of the reasons for which the fees must fall, the roads must fall movement failed because many of the people who were involved in the movement as so-called activists were not really did not really have any intention to sort of, build up the movement, but it was all about trying to grab the attention of the media, being in the first page story, and later on using that to climb up political ladders and fulfill self-profiting motives, right? And it is not, and that is the same thing we see in terms of the destruction of the nature, in terms of, the heavy urbanization that we see across Southeast Asia, the disruption of the aquatic lives there, the complete erasures of the natural environment and replacing them with so-called fancy eco resorts or eco housing or eco marketing, all of these problematic concepts, right? And they are very highlighted very much there. And he tells us that to understand this, we just cannot have an easy way out. We have to take into that complexity into consideration. And I think Nutmeg's Curse, in a way, from a wider perspective, is a very essential text also for us to is a great warning for all of us to understand that how we should not jump into labels. Rather, we should look at the practical, deal with the practical challenges and the perspectives even before getting into this very seductive, I would say it's a very seductive game of labeling and getting labeled. It sounds very fancy. I'm a decolonial historian, I'm a decolonial activist, I'm a decolonial scholar. They're amazing for decorating our resumes and getting research funds and promoting ourselves into the academic space. But at the practical level, they really don't work. And I think, in a way, within the perspective, the human more than human engagements, or in the wider perspective of understanding our positions, our theoretical positions, our practical positions, our respective contexts, I think Nutmeg's Curse is a very strong teaching lesson for all of us.
Well, this is exactly, I think, the reason why I chose this text among others. What I like and what I think is important to realize is the fact that I think Amitav Ghosh found not only a strategy to embrace this complexity by the fact there are so many topics and trajectories together, but the narrative style, I think, of this text is something that students of foreign literature, as they are and we are, the narrative style is particularly interesting for this capacity to mix. And what we're trying to do is to reflect on how the notion of hybrid from Baobab and could be others, maybe considered a nice lens for reflecting on this narrative style. And now we are slowly trying to unpack and to recognize these different narrative styles from fiction, non-fiction, use of metaphors, use of essayistic language. And I think maybe this is an exercise we're going to do in the next few classes. And well, our time is almost over, but I think I want to acknowledge the fact that Dr. Sayan Dey has shared with us a paper he wrote, and where you discuss this interesting notion of Saffronisation from saffron, Zafferano. Maybe like in 1 minute, 2 minutes, if you want to just give some sort of guidelines to have the chance to delve into your paper. So that would be a good way to end.
Sure. No, thank you so much. And I mean, first of all, once again, thanks to all of you for, for engaging with me. And I hope that my responses made some sense, because, I mean, these are perspectives where you really have a very, organized and concrete responses, because these are such complex problems and they just needs to be unpacked in those complex layers. But at any point of time you want to write to me, you're very welcome to write. Stefano has my email contacts, and I'm sure he will share it with you. Just feel free to write to me at any point of time. Now, coming to this final perspective, this article very deeply ties to the argument how decolonization is used as a false narrative in India to sort of communally fracture the country. And how the current right-wing BJP government in India is using decolonization to basically promote their own very Hindu-centric cultural and religious and ideological sentiments. And the term saffron in the religious context in India, it has a very deep connection with the Hindu religion. I mean, if you normally look at a lot of these Hindu monks and the nuns, you will see that they wear saffron colored dresses. Okay, so saffron, which signifies purity and spiritual power, according to the Hindu beliefs and practices, is something, a color that also happens to be an integral part of the BJP party flag as well. If you look at the flag, you will find it out. And saffronization is a way of idolizing and idealizing this color as a way of promoting their Hindu-centric and Islamophobic and other anti-religious sentiments who are not closely associated with Hinduism. And saffronization, again, if you just Google search it, you will find, in fact, a lot of articles have been written on the narrative of saffronization. But what I'm trying to do in my work is how our public knowledge systems, whether we are talking about educational institution engagements in educational institutions, in the transformations in curriculums and transformations in pedagogies, and various other forms of other spaces of public knowledge systems, whether research funds and all of these perspectives, you know, all of these have undergone this exercise of saffronization, right? You know, how certain selective Islamic histories are just being erased from the textbooks, and they're just replaced with fictional Hindu histories, which probably there is no confirmation if those events, if those perspectives have at all taken place in the history. It's the same thing happening for sciences, same thing happening for technologies. Random stories from Hindu myths and Hindu mythical texts are being picked up to showcase how India was advanced in science and technology in the pre-colonial era. And these are all parts of like the saffronization project. And this is something that I am centrally highlighting in this particular article.
Well, we are looking forward to reading it and reflect on it. You, I think, have given us today a lot of inputs in such a short amount of time that now we're going to probably unpack, but we are extremely grateful because I think there's nothing better than like learning from somebody who has been exploring this so deeply as you do. Now you are an assistant professor at Bayan College in Oman, but you've got, of course, already a very long career and publish a lot. So, and the energy and your presence is, of course, very much, it's unique. So I really thank you for taking the time to share this conversation and thoughts and ideas with us. And I think that now we're going to, develop a little bit more what you said and to develop this trajectory in our exploration of post-colonial literature. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefano. Thanks to all of you. And it's been great engaging with you all. And at any point of time, anything you wish to share and just want to put a flag off, just share with me at any point of time. Feel free to write. And yes, have a nice evening and have a nice time. Please take care and stay well.
Okay, thank you very much. I will interrupt this wonderful recording and will send it to you, Sayan. So thank you again.
Please take care. Thank you.